from a margin of less than a tenth of a second to easily humiliating his rivals.
Yes, boys, come on!
These are some of Verstappen's poles, but they get increasingly more ridiculous.
Half a second on pole by Max Verstappen.
Now let's kick things off with Max's first ever pole position in his racing journey. Even though he bagged his first win back in 2016, the elusive pole position didn't come his way until 2019 at the Hungarian Grand Prix. Max had been giving the Mercedes a run for its money a few times that season, but it was at the Hungaroring where he finally showed them who's boss. With a killer lap pushing his Red Bull to the limit, Verstappen snagged the pole by less than a tenth of a second ahead of Valtteri Bottas.
It's Max Verstappen for the first time in Formula One on pole!
And just to add spice, he left his teammate Pierre Gasly in the dust by almost a full second.
Gasly comes home to take second place by less than a tenth of a second!
Talk about making a statement.
Yes, boys, come on, yes!
Moving on to the next one, let's talk about Max's pole at the 2023 Spanish Grand Prix. So, on this Saturday showdown where things were pretty neck and neck between the teams, with big names like Russell and Leclerc missing out on Q3, Verstappen played it cool and snagged the top spot, beating Carlos Sainz's Ferrari by more than 4 tenths.
Verstappen is on pole. He'll be joined by Spain's Carlos Sainz.
And get this, in qualifying, the top 6 drivers were repping 6 different teams. And that's what I call some serious equality in action. A pole that did give him a run for his money was the one at the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. This wasn't your regular qualifying session, it was the season finale. After a whole season of neck-and-neck battles with Hamilton, both drivers rolled into the last race with the exact same points, 369.5, a rare sight not seen since 1974. So, the pressure was through the roof that weekend for both Verstappen and Hamilton. No room for errors if they wanted to snatch that championship. Saturday kicked off the first round of the weekend showdown. And guess what? Verstappen owned it, beating the Brit by almost 4 tenths of a second and keeping the battle wide open for the next day.
Oh, yes! Didn't expect that one, but amazing job, guys.
Verstappen and Hamilton were basically in a league of their own that season. The third guy on the grid, Lando Norris, wasn't even in the same zip code, finishing a solid 5 tenths behind the Brit. It was basically a 2-horse race. But hey, in 2021, there were times when Verstappen had some real nail-biters. Take the Austrian Grand Prix, Red Bull's home ground. The qualifying was off the charts. Verstappen nailed it on his first try, couldn't top it in the second. Just when it looked like he had the pole in the bag, Lando Norris scared the pants off everyone with this amazing lap, and bam, he ended up just 0.04 of a second behind Verstappen. Verstappen and Norris owned the Spielberg track that Saturday, leaving Sergio Perez in third, more than 2 tenths behind. Crazy stuff. Verstappen had a tough time snagging another pole in the 2020 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. He had to squeeze every ounce of power out of his Red Bull to snag the pole, just edging out Valtteri Bottas' Mercedes by less than 0.03 of a second. And get this, it was the only race in 2020 where a car not rocking a Mercedes engine took the win. Mercedes was the big boss in the engine game that season, so shout out to Honda for scoring the only other pole, all thanks to Verstappen going all out.
Pole position, that's a statement right there. Excellent job.
So there was this one pole position that was a real tough nut to crack. The 2022 Dutch Grand Prix, Verstappen's home race, with the whole orange wave cheering. The Ferraris were on fire that weekend. Leclerc and Sainz gunning for the top spot in qualifying, and Mercedes weren't far behind. First shot in Q3, Leclerc nails the fastest lap, just a hair ahead of Verstappen, setting the stage for a showdown in the last attempt. The Ferrari driver pulled off an insane lap on his second try, even beating his earlier time, making the favorite for the pole. But hold up, Verstappen didn't let his fans down. Last-minute heroics, he snagged the fastest lap, edging out Leclerc by a mere 0.02 of a second. Now that's a show.
And he'll be hoping that he's on the top step of the podium
One of the poles that didn't really make him break a sweat was in the 2023 British Grand Prix. After a pretty rough start to the season, McLaren bounced back at Silverstone, turning heads as the second fastest team behind Max Verstappen's Red Bull. He snagged the pole just 2/10 ahead of Lando Norris. But hold on, what about the other Red Bull? Well, while Verstappen nailed his 5th straight pole at Silverstone, Perez missed out on Q3 for the 5th time in a row. Quite a story. A lot of folks slammed the Mexican, claiming he wasn't Red Bull material. They argued that while the Dutch dude was owning the track with the fastest car, Perez was just cruising in the middle of the pack. It just proves that the Dutchman and his Red Bull are like a match made in heaven, and he can really push that car to its limits. But where Verstappen really flexed his muscles and showed no one could touch him was at the 2022 Belgian Grand Prix. The Dutchman owned all the qualifying sessions, snatching the pole over 6/10 ahead of Leclerc's Ferrari. But hold up, here's the plot twist. The Dutchman kicked off from the 14th spot thanks to a penalty for exceeding the number of power unit elements. They had to slow him down somehow, right? Yet the next day, Verstappen was already leading by lap 12 and cruised to victory with an 18-second gap over Sergio Perez. If this ain't pure domination, I don't know what is. Another pole that was a piece of cake for the Dutchman went down at the 2022 Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. It was a sprint race weekend, so the qualifying happened on Friday. Things got tricky though. After a normal Q1, rain crashed the party in Q2 with a red flag from Carlos Sainz, leaving both Mercedes out in the cold.
George Russell now gets out of his Mercedes. Checker flag is now flying.
Q3 started with a slightly damp track, but then the rain picked up, turning it into challenging intermediate conditions. Drivers were going off track and causing chaos with 3 red flags during the session.
And that is a red flag, and that is the end of qualifying.
Everyone wanted to lay down their laps before things got worse, making them more likely to mess up. In the final minute, a red flag from Lando Norris meant no one could improve their times.
I'm out.
Verstappen, who kept it clean throughout, snatched the pole by over 7/10 ahead of Charles Leclerc's Ferrari, showing his relentless driving in adverse conditions.
The reigning champion in the rain here at Imola knows the job is done too.
And if that qualifying session was memorable for Verstappen, the one at the 2022 Japanese Grand Prix is no joke either. Charles Leclerc was the only one who seemed capable of snatching the pole from the Dutchman, getting closer to his times with each session. The Monegasque was just 2/10 behind Verstappen in Q1 and less than 1 in Q2, setting the stage for an epic showdown in Q3. In his first shot in Q3, Verstappen nailed it with an incredible lap, while Leclerc was only more than 2/10 off.
Verstappen goes on to provisional pole by nearly over 2/10 of a second.
In the last attempt, Leclerc went all out in his Ferrari, pushing the track limits. Just when it looked like he might beat Verstappen's Red Bull, he fell short by just 1/100th of a second. Verstappen's lap was truly untouchable. The next year, it was déjà vu in the same setting, with the Dutchman owning the Suzuka track and leaving second place Oscar Piastri more than half a second behind. This way, Verstappen grabbed his 29th pole, tying with a 5-time champ Juan Manuel Fangio. The cool thing about this qualifying is that Verstappen himself says his Q3 lap is his most satisfying.
That first sector was really enjoyable.
Even pros like Anthony Davidson and Karen Chundok were like, whoa, about Verstappen's lap, calling it perfect and one of the best in F1 history.
Half a second on pole by Max Verstappen. A terrific lap from Oscar Piastri on the first run, books his first ever Formula 1 front row.
Seriously, if you check out the onboard footage of that lap, you'll see the Dutchman held nothing back, hitting every corner to the max and cruising the whole circuit like he was on rails. Pure joy. Now, let's jet over to the other side of the Pacific and chat about the 2022 Canadian Grand Prix qualifying, a rain-soaked spectacle. You know how they say rain evens the playing field and only the top dogs shine? Well, that's the real deal. It was total chaos with drivers slipping and sliding, but only the true champs made it to Q3. Even with all that drama, nobody could outdo Verstappen, who snagged the pole ahead of Fernando Alonso's Alpine by a whopping 6/10. Boom! And thank goodness they say rain levels the performance. Both Alonso and Sainz, grabbing third place, were neck and neck, less than a tenth between them. But check this out, Hamilton in fourth was a whole 6 tenths behind. The gaps were real. And if you thought that qualifying was wild, buckle up, because the one in Canada the next year, 2023, was even more bonkers. Again, it was like deja vu. Rain stole the show in qualifying, causing the kind of chaos we all secretly love and spicing up the grid. In Q3, the drivers went all out to nail a solid first lap because more rain was expected in the next few minutes. Everyone was gunning to get it done as quickly as possible. So guess what happened? Well, with about 7 minutes left, Oscar Piastri smacked right into the walls, making the lap everyone had their final shot. And the grand finale? Verstappen clinching the top spot, over 1.2 seconds ahead of the second, Nick Hülkenberg's Haas. Wild, right? Alright, so the wildest and most ridiculous qualifying in recent times goes to the 2023 Monaco Grand Prix. Just like rain, they say Monaco throws everyone on a level playing field and it's all about the driver's skills. Well, during that qualifying session, we got a front row seat to a driving masterclass, like something out of a blockbuster. It was a seriously close qualifying, and even though Verstappen was the crowd favorite, there were moments when it looked like someone else might grab that pole because everyone was pushing it to the max. On his last go, Leclerc pulled off this insane lap that put him in the lead. But just seconds later, Fernando Alonso swiped it from him by a mere 0.02 of a second. And Verstappen, the only guy who could challenge him, wasn't clocking faster times in the first 2 sectors. But here's the kicker. In the third sector, it's like Verstappen tapped into some superhuman mode. He pushed his car and the track to the absolute limit, kissing the barriers a few times and snagged the pole by a cool 0.08 of a second in what is probably the best qualifying lap in history. Verstappen pulled out all the stops, not just catching up to Alonso, but pulling ahead. Pure legend. And if you want to keep seeing epic stuff, click here to discover the scary truth about Charles Leclerc that no one is noticing. What are you waiting for? Come on,